Right, okay then. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Local Government Reform Subcommittee. Um, Evacuation, we're not expecting a fire drill, so if it does go off, follow me. Um, Apologies, we're all here, aren't we? Everybody? Oh, right, okay. Um, Declaration of interest, everybody's happy with what's on the website. Item 4, minutes. Is everybody happy for signing the minutes from last meeting? Um, Item 5, public consultation. There's no public speakers. Item 6, community governance report by Jasper. So over to you, Jasper.
Presentation that Jasper will go through in a moment summarises the sort of the journey we'd have to go on to consider whether towns and parish councils are appropriate for the borough, and that's through a mechanism called community governance reviews. I think the difficulty for us at this point, I know it's timely we do think about it, whether we require it or whether the public will perceive that it's required is largely dependent on which option the government goes for. Or even indeed if it comes about at all. For instance, if there's an authority based in North Warwickshire with Nuneaton being the administrative HQ, that might diminish the need for a Nuneaton Town Council, by way of perception. However, if it was a single unitary and the administrative HQ was based in Warwick, then you could see why that argument would strengthen. It is quite a lengthy process, and it's not something we should undertake lightly. It takes quite some time, and Jasper will go through that. I just want to touch upon the recommendations, and I think though it's timely the LGR subcommittee consider it at this point and work through the different responses. I think the most appropriate recommendation at this point is that we defer recommendation to full council to initiate the review until after government have made their decision. So once we know what government intend to do, at that point we begin the CGR process. We could start it sooner, but it could risk abortive work, and it could trigger a process which we may not want to do longer term, sort of thing. But if Jasper walks through it, then we can take any questions around the finites thereafter.
Cool, I'll do it. Sat down, seems easy. All right, the slides today aim to give an overview of community governance reviews, including their scope, the approval criteria, and how they are conducted. A more detailed summary can be found in the agenda pack with attached resources. Please feel free to jump in at any point to raise discussion points or questions. Cool. So the English Devolution White Paper stresses that strong local democracy and governance is essential for effective devolution, which can help counter the impact of more remote local decision-making as a result of unitarisation, particularly in a single unitary outcome. According to the government, parish and town councils play a central role in achieving this. Given Nuneaton and Bedworth currently has no parish or town councils, it is important to review now how they may be set up. To do this, the council must conduct a community governance review. This is the statutory process used to review parish or town council arrangements within a local authority's area. In the wake of LGR, community governance reviews have been initiated by a number of authorities across the UK. Next slide, please. First, it's important to make a point of clarification to avoid confusion. As I've touched upon, community governance and community governance reviews refers to the statutory framework for establishing town and parish councils, which, while closely involved with local authorities, are independent entities. Neighbourhood governance, on the other hand, is a new statutory duty introduced by the 2025 English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill, which is going through its third reading today. The bill requires local authorities to establish appropriate arrangements for neighbourhood governance, though the precise structures are locally determined. These arrangements aim to provide local representation and engagement through neighbourhood level decision making, empowering communities to have a stronger voice whilst giving ward councillors greater leadership roles in driving forward priorities. For example, the Pride and Place programme in Camp Hill and Bedworth, although more detail on neighbourhood governance arrangements are expected following the bill's ascension. It is likely that neighbourhood governance structures and parish and town councils will operate closely together in local areas, which will blur the distinction between the two in practice. However, for the purposes of understanding community governance reviews, it is important to recognise that neighbourhood governance, as outlined in the white paper, is a distinct framework that cannot be used to review town and parish council arrangements. So, what is a community governance review and what triggers them? They are the formal process that allows a principal council to review town and parish council arrangements within its area. A review can cover the whole borough or just specific areas, and any changes must be supported by clear community interest and evidence base. CGRs are carried out by the principal council. In this case, this would be Nuneaton and Bedworth Borough Council, who are also responsible for deciding whether to implement the recommendations that arise from the review. A CGR can be triggered in several ways. The council may initiate one itself, for example, due to population changes or, in this case, reorganisation. Local communities can start one through a petition, and existing parish councils can request one, although in this case that wouldn't be applicable. Next slide, please. Yep.
My question is in relation to community petitions and what the number of residents required to initiate that would be.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure on the exact numbers, but I can get back to you via email on that one. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so coming on that then, would that be 5% of the borough? Or 5% of Nuneaton, 5% of Bedworth? So they'll need a bit of clarification on all of that, really.
Yeah, I'll make a note on that and get back to you via email. So what CGRs can and can't do, there's a list on the board there, but in terms of what they can do, they can create, merge, alter or abolish parishes. They can change electoral arrangements, convert a parish council to a parish meeting, change the name or the style of a new parish council or parish meeting, and group parishes together under a common parish. However, they cannot change the number of district or county councillors, change those ward boundaries, change the amount of money that a parish council raises via its precepts, change individual parish councillors, and create a unitary authority. Next slide, please.
Jeff, I can answer that question while we go to the next slide. So it's dependent on the area that the petition covers, and it's by banding. So where the area has fewer than 500 electors, it's 50%. If it's 500 to 2,500, it's 250 signatures, or for more than 2,500 electors, it would be 10%.
So charter trustee areas, they were first created during past local government reorganisations in the 70s and 90s, namely to preserve a town or city's charter when a district with borough or city status was abolished. The main purpose is to protect civic, historic and ceremonial traditions until a civil parish or town council can be established in an area. The most recent example of charter trustees being established was in 2023 when the unitary authorities of Cumberland, Westmoreland and Furness and North Yorkshire were established. Charter trustees in this case were established for Carlisle, Barrow, Harrogate and Scarborough. As soon as new town or parish council is created for an area, though, the charter trustees legally dissolve. Hence, the charter trustees for Harrogate and Scarborough have been subsequently abolished following the establishment of parish councils within those areas. So as part of any future reorganisation with Warwickshire, consideration may wish to be given to charter trustee arrangements to maintain Nuneaton and Bedworth's historic continuity through reorganisation. Consolidation of historic property within Nuneaton and Bedworth, such as civic regalia, mayoral chains, coat of arms, ceremonial items and old charters represent a useful starting point in preparation for that. Next slide, please. So the assessment criteria. The government criteria for assessing CGRs state broadly that proposals must reflect the identities and the interests of the community and be effective and convenient. Within this, proposals should take into account things such as population shifts or additional development, as well as the availability of adequate infrastructure for proposed areas. For example, meeting spaces and existing community groups and representation. When considering the recommendations, the Council must also take into account the impact of existing community governance arrangements on community cohesion and the size, population and boundaries of any local community or proposed parish or town council. Next slide. So for a principal authority to carry out a community governance review, it must prepare a series of key documents, each aligned with a distinct stage of the review process. I've attached some documents within the report which provide examples of each from authorities that have done it before. Some of these documents, such as the draft recommendations report, can be quite extensive, which sort of demonstrates the resource intensity of conducting a community governance review. Next slide, please. So by statute, a CGR must be concluded within a 12-month period from the day on which the review commences, which will coincide with the publication of the terms of reference following approval to start a CGR by full council. The table on the board, it's a bit small, but it provides an illustrative timeline of the events. So following publication of the terms of reference, the council may engage in a preliminary stage to provide local briefings and meetings with stakeholders. This is then followed by the initial consultation stage, which typically runs for 8 to 12 weeks. Here, the council asks the public for views on whether a new parish or town council should be created, potential boundaries, warding, number of councillors, etc. Following this, the council considers the consultation responses and prepares the draft recommendations, including the draft proposals and any maps and the reasoning behind the proposals. This is then considered by full council. And if approved, a second consultation stage is issued to invite the public and stakeholders to comment on the draft proposals. These comments are then fed back into the final report, which sets out the final recommendations, which are then approved by full council. And following this, the council must publish the final recommendations and action the necessary change orders. Next slide, please. So yeah, as set out in the covering report, it is recommended that any decision to initiate a CGR be deferred until the government confirms the outcome of LGR in Warwickshire. Currently, this is expected for the summer of 2026, but could be subject to slip based on the government's response time. And there's a few sort of considerations that might aid the discussion here. One is around whether a, a shadow authority can conduct a community governance review. There was a case in Cumberland, in fact, that did carry out a community governance review, but this was specified under powers in the structural change order in that reorganisation. And this review was focused really on aligning parish council election dates with those of the new unitary council following public consultation. Another consideration goes to sort of what geographic scope the community governance review would cover. In a Nuneaton and Bedworth case, you'd assume this would be just for Nuneaton and Bedworth, but under a unitary arrangement, this would likely be different if this was a shadow authority, for example. So that's just a bit of a food for thought, I suppose. Yeah, and that's the end of the presentation. There's a few more resources on the following slide, but yeah, to open the floor to sort of questions and discussion at this point.
Just to clarify one element on the charter trustees element, that would likely be triggered through the structural change order by governments. They may identify that as they go through the change process that Nuneaton and Bedworth doesn't have parish and towns, and therefore they may, through that change order, say Nuneaton will have charter trustees to maintain civic responsibility for the mayor and regalia and that sort of thing, and potentially Bedworth as well. They may not, but it's a potential that could happen through that.
Well, I think that's clear that that's all going to save time, save cost, and do nothing at all for us. But open the floor up to anybody who wants to ask a question. Steve and then Chris. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for that. It seems to me that we're still in a situation where there are lots of ifs, buts, maybes, and we're not quite sure what's happening and what's going to happen and so on. Not quite cynical as Chris, but we just don't know where we are at the moment. The other thing is that if I thought that we got loads of spare cash and lots of officers sitting around twiddling their thumbs with nothing else to do, I'd perhaps be amenable to saying, well, let's give this let's start the process. But the reality is neither of those is true. And so I'm very much in favour of the recommendation personally. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. On the basis that I believe Councillor Hayes proposed the deferral, I will second the deferral. But I do have a few comments, if I may. I think the report is very good, so thank you for that. But it does generate more questions, I think, than it answers in some regards. I think wherever possible, we need to try and ensure that Nuneaton and Bedworth does the governance review, because we will know our patch better than. To be fair, whether it's a 1 or 2, we would know our patch better than whether it's a north and south or a single. But that does in itself present some other interesting questions, because I could foresee some circumstances where parts which are currently out in Nuneaton and Bedworth might actually feel more of an affinity or be more logical with us. So would we still then be the body which does it? So, for example, I'm thinking of Bramcote. That would probably make more sense because it's right next to us. Part of it's actually in my ward. 2 streets of the barracks, not a lot, but it's there. Going right up to the A5, really, because it always seems a bit odd that Rugby does those bins, but they have to travel all the way up. So I could see that, and they would see Nuneaton as more their natural place to come to, I would say. And also places like Hartsill. I'm not saying that they would want to come with us, but they are technically Hartsill, Nuneaton. That's what you see on the addresses. And some of them would also see Nuneaton as their natural nearest town and place to come to. So that is technically North Warwickshire Borough and Rugby Borough respectively. So I don't know how that would be handled. So I think that would be interesting to see if we could get some further information on that. I'm not trying to increase our empire by any stretch of the imagination, but it is, if it has to be reviewed, let's get it right for the residents, because the boundaries are rather arbitrary anyway in some regards. The other question or request, I suppose, for when we consider this again is it possible to have a comparison chart of other town councils that have resulted from unitarisation? Because there are different levels of or responsibilities that you can be given, so you can devolve different powers, but also what the precepts are for those bodies, because I think that is important information for us to know. And also it's something for us to go into with, again, whether it's one or two, we would have to engage in that process and know which powers we would want to be kept. I'd not like all of them in an ideal world, obviously, be kept as local as possible, but which we can go in to bid for with a strong enough case, but what the resulting council tax burden would be. Because obviously we're going to have council tax harmonisation going on at the same time, as well as potentially a new precept coming in. So it'd be interesting to know how that would or has worked in other areas. Sorry to add to your work, but I think it's important for us to get our heads around, Chair.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, oh yeah, Tom, and then Jeff.
Just to come back on one of those points, Councillor Wilson, I think it's really key. Actually, we do that work because town council can mean very different things in different places. So some town councils are very much just the civic role, so the mayor, the town crier, and not much more. Others do some service delivery, so local cleansing, dog fouling, graffiti removal, verges, that sort of stuff. And then others are almost pseudo district councils. So you've got Chippingham Town Council, which has, I believe, a Section 151, a chief executive, and operates almost on like a district council basis. So there is definitely a spectrum of what actually a district and borough, a town and parish is versus district and borough. And I think one of the key things we should try and avoid is, if this process occurs, we don't want to recreate a district council by proxy and undo what we've any gains we've made, but undo it by recreation. So I think it's important we have that in mind.
You can, and then it's Jeff.
I can just follow straight on. I went to a meeting representing the Nuneaton and Bedworth Council of Warwickshire had organised, of all the parish council chairs in Warwickshire. And well, there were so many people in that meeting. It was a Teams meeting. It was all off the screen and whatever. There seemed to be dozens and hundreds, it looked like, of them. But what really struck me was the point that Tom was making, the huge disparity between the different types and what they were expecting. There were some people there who were getting quite worried about local government reorganisation, not because it would sort of maybe result in them being abolished, but worrying about the amount of work it might give them. Others were much more keen and were quite clearly very, quite powerful town councils. I think we've got to be careful not to end up accidentally creating another second tier of local government. We've just got rid of one. And it's right, it's all done locally, but it was very obvious that Warwickshire have got a real job on their hands managing and the liaison between them and all these dozens or whatever it is of parish, town and goodness knows what councils. Sorry, Councillor Clark, I thought that just followed on with what Tom was saying.
Thanks, Chair. Notwithstanding what's been said already, I think it's all quite important. One of the parts that we did mention was the historic part and people's perception of area, locality, and where they live, to be honest with you. And I think it's important also that we give them that when we do come to the local government review. And I'm not saying we should do it now, I'm perhaps saying that we take the recommendations as given them, work with that when it comes along, and after we're forced to do it, then we take it on board at that point. But we do need to recognise Nuneaton and Bedworth and its historic importance for the people of Nuneaton and Bedworth and our area. So I think that's got to be brought out at some point, and would be part of the reason for having local town councils, say, and whether we go down to parishes or not, I don't know. We've never gone that far down before, although I know the Urban District Council had some parish councils, I think, in their area, didn't they, previously? So it's not unheard of in our areas, but I think it's something that needs to be taken in its entirety when we know what we're dealing with and where we're going to deal with it from, i.e. a full one authority up a tier, or whether it, and I think it needs to be part of that discussion rather than preempting it now. And I take on board your points in relation to funds and ability, because obviously we don't have the capacity at the moment to do that type of review. And I think it would be perhaps a bit foolhardy to do it now anyway. So I'm minded to go with the recommendations as set out or proposed by the two previous speakers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, I totally agree with everything. It's I mean, we've got to make sure that we keep our identity, and and in some places they still do go on the parish boundary, as in the church, as in the school catchments. So in Stockingford, well, it depends where you live in Nuneaton, really, but I mean, Stockingford can start at Galley Common and go down to Cock and Bear. So I'd have a rather big ward. But then again, on the school boundaries, it depends on which side of Church Road you live, to whether you go to St Paul's or whether you don't. And so, although we don't have parish councils, there is still the parishes, the old church parishes, that the county do stick to on school placement. So there's a lot to think about, and it definitely ain't less work. But I suppose it's one of them where we'll see. Michelle?
Yeah, I just want to check. I know North Warwickshire is parished, and I know Warwick District has obviously got the town councils in Warwick and Leamington and so on, and presumably parished beyond that. Has Rugby got? Yeah. Oh, yeah, I knew Stratford did, but I wasn't sure about Rugby because I never hear about things there.
It is a bit uneven, but I think Stratford's got hundreds, like, so and some of them are very, very small. The sort of like, tiny villages sort of thing. And then Rugby's the other end, but we're the only one that's got like none at all sort of thing. And I think when it's been coined before, it's potentially 2 towns and maybe a parish of Walkington's been mentioned. So that's the sort of spectrum we're looking at. Jeremy, what I think we could do is the actions we've been given, rather than wait to come back until we're actually ready to make a decision, we can probably add those to our sort of work plan and bring them back to the next committee and say, actually, here's how this scenario play out, and just keep that discussion evolving. So I'm sure there'll be more questions coming from it as we work through.
Okay then, so we're happy with the recommendations, been put forward, been seconded. So we'll go with them recommendations then, and bring it back to the next one. I suppose the best way of vote on it, so can we just vote on that, please? Yep. Okay, it's unanimous. Okay. Item 7 is any other business, of which we've got none, and then that's go on, Kyle.
So I was only going to ask the question about this on. So I was going to ask the question when Rugby voted last week before, whenever it was. Obviously, it wasn't with us. And how does that leave us and our submission that went through? I know it's not going to be our decision, but I just wanted to know how it left us.
So I'm speaking for other councils, so it's as I understand at the moment, but the 4 districts and boroughs that are in agreement will submit together, and I've circulated to group leaders present the letter. There's not been many amendments to the material that's been produced, generally typing, presentation, etc. So Wednesday we'll get that submitted. The Warwickshire County Council will clearly submit as well. Now, talking to chief execs last week, all of us, I think Rugby will issue a letter in support of Warwickshire County Councils. I'm sure there'll be some political discussion around that to say this is a concession we'd like or not. I don't know. That's for them. And I think that will go into the pack with the county council to say, here's the county council submission, here's a letter of support from Rugby, and then the four of us will do ours. And then it's for government to decide. Now I think we're in the best position we could be in. I think it's five of the MPs and politicians have said they support 2 unitary around the region. We have the support of the West Midlands Combined Authority Mayor who said the same. So I think presentationally we are looking good. And I think I've said previously, I think what will happen is government will come back and say both options meet the criteria, and then they will go to like public consultation in the new year.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from that, I mean, I've briefly scanned the letter today in a lunch break, and it looks fine. What I was going to ask, though, Chair, is whilst that is the submission on behalf of all 4 councils, could we submit one as an appendix or whatever, signed by all 3 of us group leaders in support of, from Nuneaton and Bedworth, in support of it, to show that it is a unanimous cross-party resolution of the council, not to say it. I just think it's important to show that there is unanimity across all of us in the chamber. Probably the one thing we all actually agree on, and it's a massive thing. So if it holds any weight, let's sign it and put it in there with it. Just an idea.
Yeah, so I'll draft a letter tomorrow and circulate it. I'm sure that can be appendiced. If yes, all right. If not, I'll send it to follow. I'll send it to the Secretary of State and say, as per the submission, please find a letter of support cross party.
Okay then. So yeah, we'll add that. That's not a problem. And thank you for tonight's meeting. Thank you.